Well, we're glad you're with us this morning. Good time to be together, and we have useful subject material in front of us this morning. Be opening up to Mark 15, and we are continuing to see the events directly leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. That's where we left off last week, with Pilate initiating the beginning of the end, however you'd want to say it, but he is given the order for Jesus to be crucified, and we are about to see that carried out. We're in Mark chapter 15. We've been looking at this sort of action-packed gospel for the last several months, and we're nearing the end of Mark's book, at least. So here we are, starting in about verse 16 here in just a moment. Glad you're with us. Looking forward to studying together. Before we get to that, though, let's begin by praying together. Our holy and Almighty Father, we're thankful for this time that we can come together and for the time we can share in consideration of your word and reflecting upon the sacrifice, the death of your Son on our behalf. We're thankful that we have this incredible event recorded for us so that we can see what happened, put ourselves in that place, and consider what you have done to redeem us. We're thankful for Christ. We are thankful for his life, his deeds, his teachings, and especially this event, his death. We pray that we would live in view of his sacrifice, that we would live striving actively to follow his example, that we would do all things for him, for he truly did all for us. We're thankful, Lord, for those who are here, the encouragement that we can offer to each other, the strength we derive sometimes merely from each other's presence. We're thankful that we can worship you together today. Please be with us as we study. Strengthen us in mind and body and soul. We give you thanks in all things and ask these favors in Christ's name. Amen. All right, in Mark 15, we have seen Jesus brought before Pilate to endure the Gentile half, the Roman half of this trial, this kind of travesty of justice that will be carried out with him as the focus. We saw that at the end of chapter 14, facing the Jewish council, facing the Sanhedrin, and noted, of course, that they violated all of their laws, or what we would assume to be many of their operating procedures. Maybe they weren't written down yet at the time, but things were not done as they typically were, and probably were not done as they should have been according to their own bylaws. And so all of these injustices were carried out, all of these codes of conduct thrown completely out the window, and Jesus is found guilty. He is convicted of blasphemy, I suppose, on very little evidence, and is then shuffled off to meet Pilate and to face the Roman portion of the trial. Well, as far as justice being carried out, things did not fare any better there. Pilate very quickly ascertained, well, this man hasn't done anything that we would execute him for. Romans, people interested in actual law, maybe this is something within their own workings that a person would be deserving of death, but even that doesn't really seem to be an impressive argument to Pilate. He's really just seeing no compelling reason to issue a sentence against Jesus, against this man. His concern, however, and a practical one for a Roman governor, his concern is that these people, this intractable, difficult nation that I've had to deal with by now for several years. Pilate would seem probably about 4 years into his governorship, halfway through his time that he'd ultimately spend in Judea. And this is not his first rodeo with the Sanhedrin, with the Jewish leaders. If I don't give them what they want, when they really want something, when they've really dug their heels in and are just not going to accept an alternative, the only alternative to that is going to be bloodshed. I mean, if I don't kill the one guy that they want me to kill, I'm probably going to have to kill a lot of them. And I don't know that I want that to happen, because then maybe the wrong person hears about what's going on out here and they feel a certain way about my competent leadership, and before you know it, I'm packing my bags and having to head off to some even worse assignment in an even farther away backwater. That's what Pilate doesn't want to happen. And so he makes sure that it doesn't happen. You want this man to die, then guess we can do that. I guess that's what will take place. He wanted to gratify the crowd, Mark tells us in verse 15. As we mentioned last week, kind of a reversal of power from what we would expect. In the same way it was in the case of Herod dealing with John, the one that is supposed to be the ruler, the one that is supposed to actually have authority, shows that he's really just wanting to please someone else, someone who would presumably have less authority and power. Yet another way that the so-called powers and authorities that Jesus deals with are unmasked for not having any true sovereignty, any true power behind them, in contrast to Jesus's. But so beginning in verse 16, we will see the soldiers leading Jesus away to actually begin that. The actual squad, the actual crew that would be in charge of carrying out the crucifixion would be 5 men, I guess, 4 soldiers and a centurion, a leader over 100. And he will, of course, factor into things in just a moment. But they first take him into the praetorium, a separate part of the governor's headquarters. Pilate doesn't live in Jerusalem full time, by the way. His main residence would be in Caesarea. He's probably in Jerusalem because it's Passover, because so many people have come to this city, and it's just better for him to be there right now during this time. But this praetorium is a kind of mixed, military and residential compound. But the soldiers take him into a certain area and call together the whole garrison for the purpose of what we saw the Sanhedrin doing. Again, things are just kind of mirroring the earlier events with the Jewish trial and its outcome, are now kind of mirrored with their companion piece in the Gentile portion of things. So the Sanhedrin mocked him and beat him and ridiculed his claims and really kind of found anything they could seize upon to leverage to try to humiliate Jesus. And now we're going to see the Roman soldiers doing the same thing. This is, we mentioned this maybe towards the end of class last week. This is a kind of a key part of Mark's focus. He spends very little time delving into the details of the physical suffering, and as we mentioned, doesn't sensationalize anything. It's not a melodrama that's supposed to, by just a sheer overwhelming of the senses with the brutal blood sport spectacle of what's going on, meant to make people feel sympathy for Jesus just on that level. And so you say, boy, I mean, if they were willing to strip the flesh from a man's back, and if they were willing to do all the things that are involved in crucifying him, then just eventually, by the sheer number of horrors that are inflicted upon him, then we eventually say, maybe there's something to it. Yes, it is horrific, and yes, it is worthwhile for us to consider and to see everything that is taking place during the crucifixion. But that's not really where Mark's focus lies. He's very straightforward. It reads almost like an AP news article in some senses, with just giving the bare facts of what happens. They scourged him, okay, then that was done. Then they crucified him, and then they took him down, and then they buried him. He's just kind of giving you the essentials with that. It's not a sensationalist account by any means. The areas that he does choose to emphasize and place more focus on are maybe instructive and maybe notable for what Mark is really trying to show us. He's not just trying to show us the depths of terrible things that humans can do to each other, and look, all of this blood proves it. One of the ideas that he focuses on is the scorn, the mockery, and the attempted humiliation of Jesus at the hands of these different bands of persecutors, Jew and Gentile alike, before, during, and after his death. And so he kind of comes back to this idea at regular intervals. And I don't know the reasons for that. Maybe I don't understand fully, or maybe they're numerous. I'm not sure. I think there might be something to the idea of, yes, it is a terrible thing to do what these men are doing, obviously. And you picture this squad of 5 men who actually takes him to the place and directs the cross beam and literally puts him on the cross. And that's terrible. It's a horrible thing to do to a human being. That almost, it goes without saying. So that's terrible, and all of the blood that is shed is obviously awful. But there is an extra depth even of wrongness, and someone who can look at that happening, look at someone else carrying that out, and see all of those things that are taking place, and make a joke about it. And try to heap added scorn on the one who is suffering those things, regardless of you're thinking about him almost. To see this happening to anyone and to make a joke at his expense. To see this happening to an innocent man and to make a joke at his expense. To see this happening to the Son of God and to make a joke at his expense. You kind of just reach progressively deeper levels of wrongness, of being totally inappropriate. There's a real impropriety, I guess, in this mockery that takes place. But at any rate, it's something that Mark gets back to regularly. It's also interesting to notice, I guess, what are the soldiers, what's kind of the focus of how they're making fun of him? What's the big joke to them? The soldiers that we meet here in 16 through 20. Yeah, Gary.
He was the Son of God, and they wanted to make a mockery out of that.
Okay.
That they put a sign up there on the cross that says, Jesus, Son of God, and to mock him. And the crucifixion was bad. That made our Lord's crucifixion worse because they put a crown of thorns on his head.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
And we're going to see the crown of thorns and the purple robe there in verse 20. And the accusation, which is part of Roman law, we see in verse 26, you have to put a reason, you have to have a written kind of summary of their crimes. You have to put that in view so that people, and that's part of the point of the cross, is as a deterrent, is as a control through fear mechanism. We want people to know, don't do this. Whatever this guy did, you don't want to do it. So what did this guy do? Well, we write it so that you understand and you don't do this because Rome is not happy with it. Okay, what's Rome really find comical about this, Steve?
Me, they're mocking him as a king.
Okay.
The crown, the robe,
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, that to the Roman mind seems to be the absurdly comical part of all of this. That here's the king of the Jews, and that's what the accusation is. That's kind of his charge that Pilate gets him for, I guess. They have this mockery with the crown. They have the mockery with the purple robe. They're pretending to kneel to him. Give him a staff as sort of a scepter in other versions. Mark doesn't really include that idea. He has them striking him with a reed, whether that was a staff or maybe the same word would be used for arrows. Maybe some have thought an arrow or a spear or something like that could be what they're actually hitting him with. But this mockery of the idea that he's the king. Now, and I think we mentioned last week, possibly some of this is meant to mock the Jews as a whole, to say, yeah, here's your king, and it kind of fits. It's about what you guys deserve, I guess. This conquered people, sure, he would be a good king for you all. But more than anything, it is ridiculing the idea of this man claiming authority, this man claiming sovereignty, claiming to be some kind of a king. That's what is really ludicrous to them about it. Now we saw on the other hand, what was the point of mockery for the Jews? That's more what Gary was saying a moment ago, that his spiritual nature, the Son of God, the Christ, that he's calling upon himself as a prophet, as someone who can speak for God, as someone who has a supernatural essence to him. All of those things to them were the ridiculous aspect. And those are the two things that are most important to each party who wants to see Jesus dead, of course. I guess the Sanhedrin has their own material motives as well, but what this man claims for himself in relation to God, that really rankles them. The Romans don't really care about any of that, but if you set yourself up as a rival king, as a leader of men, then we're going to have to deal with that as well. So you kind of see it coming from both sides. His divinity is ridiculed by the Jews. His kingship is ridiculed by the Romans, his royalty. But all of that, of course, Mark spells out there in verses 16 through 20. The false saluting, the false hailing, the striking, the spitting upon him, everything leveraged to add maximum suffering, maximum humiliation. Again, reminding ourselves, this is post-scourging. Many people would not have survived to this point, and certainly he's already in a tremendous amount of physical pain. They're adding to that, but heaping upon it especially the scorn and the ridicule. Anything else to address up to verse 20 or so? Other things to observe there. All right, beginning in verse 21 then, we see him actually being taken to the place. Mark, I guess maybe there's some dramatic tension being built up a little bit. The call has been coming out to crucify since verse 13, and of course we know from the earlier predictions, Jesus knows that that's where this is heading, but they've cried out to crucify Jesus back in verse 13. In verse 15, they said he's delivering him to be crucified, so we're going to do that. But then you see immediately, well, we're not there yet. We have to do all this other terrible stuff first. And then in verse 20, okay, finally, they're leading him out to crucify him. We're still not actually putting him up on the cross yet. We have some more ordeals to suffer through before that is actually performed. So that starts in verse 21, the road out to the cross. He is supposed to carry his own crossbeam, probably we should not be picturing a full, T-shaped post and crossbeam. Either the post would already have been there or it's going to be erected when they get there, but traditionally the prisoner is just carrying the crossbeam, just that one plank itself. But Jesus, probably by this point, simply weakened from everything that has taken place before, is incapable of going the full way. And so as would have happened, I guess, with some regularity, they're going to enlist someone else, compel or press into service someone else who's nearby to carry the cross for him. This is a really interesting idea, and maybe Mark's gospel fleshes out some of what makes it interesting or compelling more than the other gospels, because he gives us a little bit more information about who this man is, this certain man who bears the cross of Jesus. Simon, a Cyrenian, it's northern Africa. And he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Mark typically, unless there's someone who is going to be very important in the story, like Jesus or Pilate or Peter or whoever else it might be, typically very economical with giving us a name, telling us who somebody is, what's a person's name. Here he names 3 people that aren't really very important in the story. I mean, Alexander and Rufus don't do anything. They're just relatives that don't even actually appear there. And Simon has gone from the story probably by the next verse, it seems. So why is he telling us about these three people? Simon and Alexander and Rufus. Why hit us with these names all at once? Any theories there?
They had their own synagogue, didn't they?
Probably, are you talking about in Acts 8, the synagogue of the freedmen? Those are probably just men from Cyrene and Alexandria who would have been from the same place. I don't think, there's, I guess, no direct association with Simon and those men. But yes, people from Cyrene, from Alexandria, from several of those northern African metropolises did have a synagogue in Jerusalem. That might have been what brought him here. He's described as a traveler at some places too, so maybe here for Passover would be hard to say. But good association there. Nathan?
I would say you mentioned the name so that if you were curious, you could go to that person to confirm the story.
Okay.
So it acts as proof.
Okay. We're dealing with an account that we want to be accepted, and kind of similar to the way Paul goes about things in 1 Corinthians 15, seems to be for a lot of that same purpose, to say, look, there are people who experienced it, and so you can go and talk to many of them. There's hundreds of them out there, and so maybe these would be a couple of folks who were there. This particular family was as close to things as you could possibly have been. Simon is involved in the proceedings. Who knows where Peter was at this point? We can't maybe speak for many of the other disciples. John will end up at the foot of the cross eventually, but Simon is in the action. Well, if we want to talk to these men, Simon or Rufus or Alexander, how might we talk to them, or how might we know who they are? There's, to me, a pretty useful theory. To me, the idea of Mark including three kind of random names all at once seems to insinuate, which it has at a couple of other points in his gospel, this is somebody that might be known to his readers. These are people that maybe you live among, maybe people that you worship among. We have surmised that Mark is writing to a Roman audience. I think there's good reason to believe that old tradition, that is his audience, that he's writing his gospel early, and that he's writing his gospel in, or definitely to, a Roman Gentile audience. Paul mentions a man named Rufus in Romans chapter 16. That's one of the people that he wants to give some greetings to in the church in Rome. He talks about Rufus and his mother and mine. Rufus's mother evidently was a woman special to Paul in some way. The connection has long been made that says, why would Mark mention these three people unless they were known to Roman Christians, unless they were believers themselves? They were disciples that were known in the early church. And so kind of along the lines of what Nathan is saying, if you are interested in knowing about Jesus, knowing about what actually happened, and maybe you've begun to talk to people who talk about him and who seem to know something about him, and you live there in Rome, well, maybe you've met Rufus, maybe you've met Alexander, and you can go and say, boy, what really happened there? Did your dad tell you any more about it? Were you there too? We don't know where they were at the time, but that causes us to think further, causes me to think further at least, about this completely unique thing that is taking place. Now, I don't want to make too much of it. Full disclosure, a lot of this is just kind of thinking, I guess, is just sort of putting conjecture together maybe. But especially in Mark's gospel, and especially in Jesus' teaching in Mark's gospel, the idea has been so forward, the idea has been so much at the front, that you have to be a disciple. He wants to make disciples of people. And what's a disciple? It's someone who follows Jesus. What's someone who follows Jesus? Or how do you do it, or to what extent do you do it? Jesus tells us himself, if you'd follow me, if you'd be my disciple, deny yourself, you take up your cross daily, and you follow me. That's what he's called his disciples to do. That's what they're going to have to do. Literally? Well, maybe sometimes. Some of them certainly did. Christians were crucified in the first century. Metaphorically, sure, you're willing to do it. That's that there's not an upper bound to your discipleship that says, I'll follow him, but I'm not going to be crucified for him. Well, if it demands that, then I'll do it. But here, Simon, he's not crucified, sure. And I don't know if he's a believer at this point. If he is a believer afterward, I can't say for sure. But I know that here's a man who is literally the first one to take up a cross and go with Jesus. What would that do in the mind of a person who had any regard for the teachings of Jesus? Again, let's say this man is a disciple. Wouldn't that make things more real to you than they otherwise possibly could be, that when Jesus has called upon you to be his disciple and has told you the full depth of what that means, this man, no one else on earth can say what this man can say, that I actually did it. I actually took a cross and went with Jesus. I took his cross and followed him. I don't know, that breathes life into that, what it means to be a disciple idea. And in these later chapters, where we've seen such an emphasis on who he does this for and who the recipients of this benefit, this boon that he is granting to the world are, that Jesus says, this is the blood of the covenant. I'm shedding this for many. I'm shedding this for you. And we see him taking the place of Barabbas. Just all these things that show us he's willing to save all. He's willing to save all men. He's doing this even for the people who desert him. He's doing this even for the people who cheer his death. He's doing this for all men. To have this one man who, in this small way, shares the experience with him and gains some understanding or appreciation for that idea of bearing a cross and following Jesus. If his sons were to become Christians, if his sons were to become followers of Christ, in large part you'd say, well, that makes sense. That makes total sense. For these people to have experienced that, to have that on their minds, to have seen everything that happens there developing at the cross, at Golgotha, and to come away with a love for, an appreciation, a desire to sacrifice everything for Jesus is fitting. That's a puzzle piece that slides nicely into place for me. The other idea, kind of tracking right alongside that, is the manner, how Jesus conducts himself, I guess, be the short way of saying what's going on here. How he suffers. And we noticed this back in chapter 14, where the idea, you remember Mark mentions time and time again, he uses the word witness. He wants to talk about being a witness, literally being a martyr, but being a witness, the testimony you give. And so we saw false witnesses who come and try to make lies up about Jesus. And we saw Peter not wanting to witness at all. He says, I don't know anything. I can't give you any testimony because I don't know this man at all. He recuses himself from giving any witness. Jesus stands as the martyr. He stands as the witness. He speaks the truth. He does not offer accusation in return against anyone. He speaks the truth and he faces the outcome of that testimony. And he suffers in silence. He suffers in obedient faith to the Father. He suffers out of love for mankind. How he conducts himself in this as a witness is impressive to us and seems to have been impressive to anyone who saw it, who had any shred of decency or fairness about them. And so maybe Simon and Alexander and Rufus are some of the first who will see that. The centurion at the foot of the cross might be another one who sees it. But all along, I think we should have in our minds that if you witness this man suffering in this way, he's witnessing who he is by suffering in this way, with no complaint, with absolute regal dignity. That has an impact, and we can let it have an impact upon us. Some of that we will observe in verse 23, playing into this whole idea that they, and they isn't mentioned. It's probably not the Romans. It's probably not anyone of the kind of enemy faction. Probably talking about some of his followers, maybe some of the women who were following nearby or something like that. But they try to give him wine to drink. This is sort of pain management. This would be a primitive way of trying to relieve some of the pain, but he doesn't take it. He's not going to dull his senses. He's not going to dull any of the pain, in any way evade the suffering that is coming his way. He's going to endure all of it. He's going to have his mind completely intact. He is going to feel every splinter from the rough wood, every exposed nerve from the scourging, every nail that is driven into place. All of that will be experienced in its fullness, and yet with this same demeanor, with this same lack of lashing out, trying to defend himself, trying to explain himself, any of that, but just with this absolute dignity and courage with which he faces the cross. All of this seems to be having an effect on the people that observe it. Doug?
Just had a thought that there's a lesson with Simon for us. He was, in all likelihood, just coming up there for the Passover.
Yeah.
In a real way, he was on vacation, and then he gets compelled to do this thing, and we get inconvenienced a lot of times, and it's to do good, to do a good deed, but we see it as an inconvenience and not something we planned on doing.
Yeah.
But if I need this,
Yeah.
I gotta
Last thing I wanted to do today.
I know, I gotta go help them, and we just never know the good we'll do by following through on something like that.
A very good point. I mean, here would be an extreme case of that. And again, that's assuming, Simon, Alexander, and Rufus are people that Mark's audience would know because they're followers of Christ. And I want that to be the case, obviously, the optimist in me saying, yeah, I want that to be what happened. But absolutely a thing to think of there, that here's, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Simon's the one that they would look for. Somebody, you look strong, you get it, and come here and handle this for us. Oh man. But if he's saved as a result, his two sons are saved as a result, they come to know and to have greater appreciation and love for Jesus as a result, that would be the best day of their lives. Tim?
So Drew, don't you think Simon and them are all part of the group sitting outside saying, or the crowd saying, crucify him?
It's hard to know. Yeah,
I mean,
could have been.
they may not be hollering crucify him, but they may be hanging out in a group with them, and then when Jesus comes out, so that may, like I say, that may have saved them.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the right place at the right time instead of the wrong place.
You have a different feeling about it afterward than you did at the beginning of the day.
You're sitting around with the crowd just going to see what's happening. You may not be one of the vocals saying crucify him, but you're hanging out just like people do, and this changes your whole life.
Yeah, and that is, there would be the contrast we saw earlier in chapter 15, verse 11. Not that the crowd has no agency or that they don't have any responsibility for what they do, but they are being stirred up. They are being stoked to do this by the chief priests, is where Mark laid the primary blame, the chief priest, or maybe the high priest himself. But you would undoubtedly have in that group a lot of people, as you do have in any crowd that starts yelling anything, a lot of people who are probably thinking to themselves, I don't know one way or another. Or maybe people who think, I kind of don't think we should be doing this, but Johnny on my right's doing it, and Harry on my left is doing it, and I don't want to look like a weirdo, and especially if people are getting crucified today, I definitely don't want to be the nail that sticks out and gets the hammer. So crucify him. I'll say the same thing. I mean, I'll go along with that. You get caught up in the fervor of it, and you get caught up in trying to not stand out, and so you follow that example, and that has an impact. As we've said, then the obvious counterpoint to that would be, what's the other example that is simultaneously being set, and what power, what influence does that have upon people? It takes longer to sink in. It is more challenging to let that influence work upon someone, but to see the silent suffering of Jesus was absolutely powerful in its own right. It stirs people up later in the quieter moments where they can actually reflect themselves rather than being part of a shouting crowd. But worthwhile to think, which one of those do I want to follow, Gary?
This is the most signal event in the history of the world that's taking place right here.
Yeah.
And these soldiers couldn't get these three dead quick enough. They wanted them out of the way so they could frequent their brothels and their places to drink. They didn't care.
Yeah, just a job for them. Yeah. And by this point, I don't know, I don't have any reliable record of, how often were crucifixions carried out in Jerusalem. It was not uncommon. It was probably something that people would have seen, with some kind of regularity. So I don't know how experienced this squad of men would have been in doing that, but they'd probably seen worse and probably had done this same thing before. Just another day at work for them. Yeah, Karina.
So it says that they had to press him.
Yeah.
So, compelled, if you don't put the other two words in front of it, he was not compelled himself to go up.
No.
We're not going to walk up to a group of Roman soldiers and say, hey, let me help this guy out. No, you stayed away as far as you could. They came to him and said, look, you need to help because we're not healing the guy.
Yeah.
Because we're not supposed to. And so, and he does say he was coming into Jerusalem. So if he was a follower of Christ, maybe he never actually seen Christ up close. So to not even recognize him, Christ isn't recognizable in and of himself at this moment.
Yeah.
So having to bring him in, and then what comes to me afterwards is if he helps him carry all the way, does he stay and watch the crucifixion and watch the whole thing all the way through? I mean, in awe of knowing what he was a part of and couldn't help it.
Yeah.
And maybe did he understand the scriptures that Christ had been trying to pass through to people of I will be killed and
Yeah.
crucified? There's like you said, there's a lot going on there.
There is, and certainly for this man, you would think a lot to think about, a lot to unpack later on. And obviously a lot of what Mark tells us is clear in hindsight, I guess. He mentions, again, it's not a chief focus of his gospel. He just mentions a couple of times directly Scripture being fulfilled. But when you sit down and you think about that afterward, maybe if you were a witness to the crucifixion and you find yourself just as an observant Jew reading the 22nd Psalm or the 69th Psalm later on, you think, my goodness, it's exactly what just happened. Here I am reading the Psalm 22 a month after the crucifixion. I thought that they were doing a good thing, and that's somebody who said he was coming to fulfill all Scripture, and now this is staring me in the face that everything that David was writing about is exactly what I saw happen on that day. I don't know how that wouldn't have an effect on you. So, yeah, some of these things are, maybe if there was the person just staying and watching to see what was going on, it's kind of a car wreck times 1,000. It's hard to look away from maybe once it starts happening, just inertia. I'm going to stay and watch it until the end. What do you think about afterward? What pieces do you put together afterward? I think all of that is rolling around our minds as we're looking at this account. Anything else here? Yeah, Taylor.
You've mentioned it a few times, I mean, the suffering and silence. The first thing Jesus said when Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him. He's silent until verse 34. If I correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
There is nothing said in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
The suffering that is going on in that, in the mockery. Um, It gets me because of how silent it is.
Yeah.
And then you see two sides, right? You see the everyday life of the Roman soldiers, and then you see Jesus, who's on a mission, keeping his head down, knowing what needs to be done. It really spells that out.
Yeah. And even more to that point, and Taylor brings up a good point there. I mean, verse 2 and verse 34 are the bookends. Those are the only times Jesus talks in this whole chapter. But even more than literally not saying anything, just go through a lot of these sentences all throughout chapter 15, but especially picking up in about verse 16. And see how few of the how few of the sentences or phrases have Jesus as the subject, where he's not doing a lot of things. He's having a lot of things done to him. He is having a lot of things happen to him. He's the object of most of these sentences. They led him, they took him, they beat him, they crucified him, they did this to him. He's not the active participant. Underscoring, of course, what we've pointed out a lot of times, and always worth remembering, I suppose, it's happening because he is letting it happen. He is submitting to it. But this is just what these men are doing. Jesus is not, he's just, kind of as Taylor said, he's finishing the mission. He is just following through by allowing all of this to take place once it has begun. Yeah.
He's just like, what? Seriously, that's it?
Yeah, you're not going to give me any more than this? Yeah. And it is an amazing thing to have these be the stakes and to not offer any stronger defense or resistance than this.
Drew, that's also prophecy.
Yes. Yeah.
Building up.
100%. And again, not just in the specific wording of things, or that, okay, literally he wasn't supposed to say anything, but the overall picture that we get from Isaiah's passages about the servant, from a lot of David's descriptions of this suffering figure, from the typology of Job or Joseph or anyone like that who has come before, all these things that prefigure this kind of archetype, the sufferer, the innocent sufferer. And what happens to that one? He does it in silence. He doesn't open his mouth. He turns his back to them so that they might strike it. He offers himself up in this way, and Jesus is fulfilling that type. He's fulfilling those prophecies through all of his conduct throughout this entire event. So, yeah, Brandon.
I have a quick thing that just popped into my brain about 1 Corinthians 13. Right? Like, I know as a man, when something is wrong, I want to make it right. I want the truth to be known by all. I want all to agree to the truth. And Jesus is not doing that here. And I'm like, how can I reconcile that with like this pursuit of justice and truth, right?
Yeah.
And so 1 Corinthians 13, talking about love, is that it doesn't seek its own benefit, it's not provoked, and it doesn't keep an account of the wrong suffered. Like, Jesus isn't constantly rubbing it in our face that our sin crucified him. Like, we need to remind ourselves of that he's not holding that over our head. He didn't seek his own in that moment, and I'm like, to dust.
Yeah.
By that.
He has told us the meaning, and now he is going to do it, and it sort of just stands as that. It is the mission accomplished. It is the work done. And we do need to draw our own conclusions about that. All right, we're going to have to finish there. Thank you for your participation and your listening this morning. I had a lot to say about these verses, but